Let's talk about creative block. Unfortunately, the reality of being a creative is eventually you're going to run into a creative block. Sometimes you go a long time without it, sometimes you go a short time without it. Sometimes it doesn't last very long, sometimes it lasts a long time. But no matter what, it's inevitable. So I thought it might be helpful to kind of discuss some of the ways that I use to deal with creative block. As a full-time videographer and graphic designer, I don't really have the option to just wait for inspiration to hit me. And so I feel like over the years, I've developed a couple different ways to kind of get myself through some creative block. So what I'm going to discuss with you today is what works personally for me, but it might not necessarily work for you. But hopefully, despite that, I can help you get through your next creative block. So the very first thing that I would recommend you do is to give yourself a deadline. This may sound counterintuitive, but I think sometimes if we're not putting enough pressure on ourselves, we get indecisive, and so we're not making enough decisions to get us to an end goal. And so I think having the external pressure of a deadline will help you make decisions and then push your project along, because you won't have the option of just stopping and waiting for something to hit you. You have to get something done by this date. And once you make enough decisions, I feel like you get to a point where you can start being creative again. Because it can feel very daunting if you have unlimited choices to make. But once you've whittled down those options, it's much easier to be creative and be more decisive. Maybe you already have the theme that you want to use. Maybe you have a composition that you want to use. Maybe you have the typography picked out. Maybe you already have your reference images. Being able to be more decisive will help give your project more focus. So if you're encountering creative block, give yourself a deadline. But if you still feel like you have creative block and you're getting frustrated, step away from the project. Get out of your chair, stretch, go for a walk, work on another project. No matter what it is, just stop working on that project. The more frustrated you become, the worse it's going to get. But there are other benefits as well, because sometimes the thing that you need is a fresh set of eyes. So sometimes stepping away from the project that you're working on will allow you to see it from a new perspective. I'll also say sometimes the solutions that you're looking for come to you when you're not working on the project. I can't tell you how many times I've gone for a walk, and part of the way through the walk, I figure out the solution that I'm looking for. So that's why I say, don't be afraid to step away from the project. Now, my next piece of advice would be to find one thing to explore. Often as creatives, we're looking to do something that's never been done before. But honestly, that's not always necessary. And so something that I like to do personally is to choose something that I'm interested in and then just do as much of it as I possibly can. If you look back through my work, I have different time periods of focusing on different things. For instance, there was a time period where all I did was collages. There was a time period where I focused a lot on typography. There was a time period where I was really focused on being grungy and experimental. So really what I'm doing is just giving me one thing to focus on and then just trying to do that thing as best as I possibly can and do as many things possible within that thing. I think that helps alleviate some of the pressure of trying to find the next thing to do or the next thing to explore. So instead, your goal would be to explore that one thing to its fullest extent. I think this is also good for creatives because it helps you build more experience within a niche rather than trying a bunch of different things all at once. You pick one thing, you focus on that thing for as long as you possibly can, and then once you feel like you've explored that thing to its fullest extent, and you move on. And so the next best thing for you to do is to try something new. If you do one thing enough times, you'll eventually get bored with it. But this is actually a good thing, because once you become bored of something, you start to let your guard down, and what happens is you become more imaginative and more creative. And I think whenever you start to get bored, it's a lot easier to try out something that you wouldn't normally do. And I think sometimes creative block comes from getting a little bit too comfortable with where we are creatively. So if we get bored enough, it'll push us to get a little bit uncomfortable and to try something new. Sometimes trying something new is just what you need to spark some creativity. So be bored, don't think about what you should do, and think about what you can do. Try something new and be a little bit uncomfortable. But sometimes the best thing to do once you've tried something new is to revisit old ideas. So if you take something that you're familiar with and have a lot of experience with and add something new to it, you'll eventually come up with something that's different that you haven't done before. And that's something that I've been learning a lot recently. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, there was times where I focused just specifically on collages, and then I might have moved on to something like typography. But since I've spent enough time on both of those things, now I can look back at it and take the experience from both of them and then combine them to make something new. Just the other day I was working on a poster that was mainly typographic, but I didn't really know what to do with it. But everything that I would have done normally really wasn't working. And so I thought to myself, you know, it's been a long time since I've tried collage, so why don't I try to incorporate those two things together? And the results turned out really well. I put two things together that I normally wouldn't have, and I created something that was new to me. And because it was new to me, it felt fresh and exciting. And that was really all I needed to get past my creative block. And so sometimes creative block can be solved by looking in your past rather than looking towards the future. But if you've tried everything that I've mentioned in this video so far, sometimes the only thing you can do is wait. Like I said in the beginning of the video, creative block is just part of the creative cycle. It's not about if it happens, it's about when. So sometimes the only thing you can do is accept that that's the reality and then just wait for it to be over. I know it's not the ideal, but it makes accepting it a lot easier and makes it a lot less frustrating if you just accept it and move on. Hey, Austin from the future here. I accidentally forgot to say a couple things, so now I'm here to fix that. So what I forgot to mention is why I think it's important to accept it. So the thing about creativity is you're using your mind a lot. But what happens whenever all of that creativity in your mind is being focused on having creative block? Instead of feeling free and creative, you feel constrained and you feel frustrated. And so that constraint and that frustration just continues to build and you don't feel any better. In fact, you probably just get worse. And so how I alleviate that pressure is by accepting it and understanding that it's going to end. It might not be right now, but at some point, I'm going to get over the creative block. So in the case that nothing else works, the only thing that I can do is to take a breath, relax, and then just wait until it's over. Because it will eventually be over, and then when it is, I'll be back to normal and I'll be much happier, and I wouldn't have wasted a bunch of time and energy feeling anxious and frustrated over something that's out of my control. And so once again, just accept that it's the reality and wait for it to be over, because it will be over. So those are all the things that I use personally to get over creative block. I can't say for sure they're gonna work for you, but if they work for me, hopefully they'll work for you too. And if you think anything that I've mentioned in this video is helpful, I'd appreciate if you would check out the rest of my channel and then consider subscribing. I hope to see you in the next video.